Timothy Goes to School was a fairly well-known cartoon based on a book series for children centered around the day-to-day life of the titular Timothy, a young raccoon inhabiting a world of anthropomorphic animals. The show wasn't anything remarkable and was very much geared for the younger audience, but with such an innocent show, there was bound to be some kind of urban legend or, quote, creepypasta to be found, and I was fortunate enough to catch a glimpse of one such legend. What I witnessed was a story called Timothy's Bad Week, and was provided by YouTube. Like many things on the internet these days, I assumed it was just a fan-made creepypasta or a trolling attempt. Either way, I decided to allow my morbid curiosity to get the better of me, and sat back to watch what horrors some crazy guy on the internet had inserted into one of my cartoon childhood shows. I fully expected a YouTube poop-style run crammed with creepy cliches, and sure enough, the video played in black and white with poor image quality that made the characters seem like they were constantly shifting. Someone had edited the eyes so they were white voids, but I noticed they left the theme tune and opening sequence otherwise untouched. Following the intro, the video cut to black and text read, Monday, before opening to an empty street with Timothy dressed for school, waiting at the bus stop. Animation as bad as ever and all done in black and white with those edited eyes. I rolled my eyes a bit at this. Seemed like everyone who ever wrote a Lost episode had to do something freaky with the eyes. Regardless, I watched as the bus pulled over and Timothy got on. All the characters were on the bus, but seemed a little different. Yoko the cat seemed to be angry. The two Franks, both bulldogs, were fighting each other and no one seemed to bother despite their brawl being quite physical. Next to the fighting Franks sat Doris the beaver, always depicted as a bit of a tomboy. She was much larger than usual, to the point of looking morbidly obese, and kept crying as Flitz the badger and Claudia the raccoon taunted her repeatedly from a nearby seat. Timothy went to sit by a window and glanced over at Nora the mouse, who was holding hands with Charles, another mouse. The pair stared out in front of themselves as if trying to block out the rest of the world. Finally, at the very back of the bus sat Lily the fox, having only one shoe and looking rather upset. One of her arms seemed to have noticeable bruises. The scene suddenly went black and text read, Tuesday. To my surprise, when the text faded, the scene once again showed Timothy waiting for the bus. This time his clothing seemed a little dirty and torn as the bus pulled up and he climbed on board. Yoko the cat seemed even angrier than before. The two Franks were covered in cuts and bruises as they kept looking over at one another from either side of the bus, as if ready to fight again at any moment. Doris was cowering in her seat as Flitz and Claude began to pelt her with spitballs. No one really seemed to notice or care. Timothy once again sat by the window and glanced over at Nora and Charles. The two mice were now huddled together as if frightened, still staring in front of themselves, ears pinned back. At the very back of the bus, Lily was now completely barefoot and her bruised arm was now visibly scarred, a small cut also visible on her right ear. The scene once again went black and read, Wednesday.
By this point, I was getting a little bored of the reproductive cuts. Yeah, my curiosity demanded and I continued to vow regardless that this scene once again showed Timothy waiting for the bus. This time, his clothing was very dirty and torn. Also, his fur began to look unkempt as the bus pulled up and he climbed on board. Yoko was now flexing her claws quite literally and scratching at the back of a seat in front of her in anger. The two Franks were still covered in cuts and bruises, though one of them now sported a cast on their arm as the other glared at pure hate and the other sibling. Doris was sobbing and begging Fritz and Clyde to leave her alone as they taunted her, tossing donuts at her. They had smuggled onto the bus in a small box. Timothy, per usual, sat by the window and glanced over at Nora and Charles. But this time Nora was by herself, looking very unwell, and as she continually looked at the empty space Charles had been a day earlier. At the very back of a bus, Lily was still barefooted and and her feet was now covered in mud, and her fur unkempt as her dress was all torn. Her scarred arm now lying limp as one of her ears now had a large chunk missing. The scene went to black and then text read, Thursday. And I have to admit, at this point, I was a little unnerving. Whoever made this YouTube prank sure had a lot of time to waste it. Then again, I guess I was no better there as I continued to watch. The text revealed Timothy waiting for the bus again. This time his clothing was practically falling off him, and his fur looked like it was extremely dirty and unkempt. Once again, the bus pulled over and Timothy climbed on in. Yoko was nowhere to be seen. The two friends were now down to one, who was covered from head to toe in vicious looking scars, tempered uncontrollably, muttering to himself. Doris was catalytic as Fritz and Charles sat quietly, looking away from her and seemed to lower their heads every now and then in a state of a great shame. Timothy, as he always did, sat by the window and glanced over at the empty chair Nora had occupied the other day when he noticed that she was gone completely. Timothy turned to Fritz and Clyde for the first time. The pair once again lowering their heads as if to avoid his stares. At the very back of the bus, Lily was covered from head to toe in mud, cuts and bruises. Her clothing was shredded, and her right ear was now bandaged as she had taken a rocking back and forth singing Kookaburra Sits in the Old Gum Tree. This was when things got very strange, even by Creepypasta standards. The Kookaburra Sits in the Old Gum Tree song continued to play over and over as the scene turned to black and text read, Friday. The song played on loop as the very now familiar sight of Timothy waiting for a bus appeared. However, he was now on a crutches and hopped into the bus with a look of anger. The bus was completely empty, save for the Fritz and Clyde. The pair now sitting on either side of the bus and shaking uncontrollably as Timothy stopped and looked at them both before he headed to the usual window. And then everything faded to black as the Kurabaka Sits in the Old Gum Tree song played one final time before the video cuts off. After a moment, I thought I'd turn off the computer and went to do the same work in the real world. Decided that while an interesting watch this creepypasta was far from the best. Nevertheless, I saved the link so I could show it to a friend who used to watch the show regardlessly, just to mess with him. It took a couple of days before I managed to get sent to a friend around, and I opened the link to show them the story. To my surprise, the link ended up showing the normal episode of the Timothy Goes to School, and my friend had a good laugh at my experience, as I despisedly tried to convince him I wasn't crazy. To this day, I have yet to fully understand where the real link went, and a part of me truly wonders if I didn't dream it all up. Whatever the case, the story of Timothy's past week soon went from the pasta I had hoped to forget about after their cheap joke on a friend into the years-long obsessions. Maybe someday, someone will find it again. Until then, happy huntings.